when you think of a podcast, community might not be the first thing you think of.
When you as a listener run into us, it's like, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your perspective.
Some of the coolest conversations I've had with people who listen to the podcast are when they have come up to me and be like, man, that episode on this. And then we start like talking about it right then and there.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the New Life Young Adult Podcast, also known as the Sippin' Saints. We have some really fun and exciting updates to bring to you in this short podcast. I'm here with Zach with his lovely sweater. I mean, look at that piece of art. And then Abel as well, over there wearing his neutral clothes.
Black jacket.
It looks stylish. Look at the shoes. No one can see the shoes, but they're there. Fancy. Looking sharp for sure.
Thank you.
We are actually in the process. We've had a few meetings and we're just really feeling like God wants to take this podcast to a whole nother level. We really believe that we can bring even more value to you. And so we're going to talk about 3 specific things that we're feeling for the podcast for 2024, how we want to impart that. And also we'd love to hear your feedback. We had a Google survey for young adults and you guys turned up, and we have some really cool topics that we're going to be releasing soon, but we would love to hear more feedback. So if you have specific things that you want to hear about topic wise, please drop it in the comments and let us know, and we would love to hear more from you. We want to make sure that we're bringing value to you, and so we want to know what you want to hear about. So make the time to do that. We would love to hear from you. Let's just maybe mention those 3 things that we really feel that we want to implement this year. One obviously is bringing value. The other is community, building community, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then also how we personally value authenticity, like being real, being who we are, all the silliness, all the craziness, the real parts of us, and how we can kind of implement that into the podcast. So, Zach, do you want to kick us off with the aspect of community and how we want to bring that into the podcast this year?
Yeah, sure. I think a big question that we want to answer together with you guys, with the audience, how can a podcast be a part of community, of building and nurturing and cultivating community? When you think of a podcast, community might not be the first thing you think of. We are sitting in a room with a couple of us speaking into microphones, and you guys are watching or listening in your cars, at home, at work, whatever it is. So how does there's this distance there, but how can this podcast actually bring us together and build the community that we have, specifically here at New Life? It's we may have listeners beyond our church context, but our first audience is people within our local church communities. But how can this build community there and beyond if that's how God stirs it up? So that's a question I'm really interested in. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I was just gonna say, I think the best podcasts or the best platforms, the best anything really, like even think about like restaurants or successful businesses, all have a sense of community. And they all have a sense of like you belong. I think one of the ways I've best experienced this is through obviously through like church and community and stuff, like, but in a different sense. I work a little bit for an e-bike company, and so, but they did a really good job of cultivating community with their customers, like inviting customer feedback, really making sure customers feel like they're a part of the process, like they're not just clients, but they're friends who we are providing a service for at the end of the day. But you're not just like a clientele, you're a part of what we're building essentially. So I think that resonates with me. I think when I enjoy listening to podcasts, I really have I can appreciate podcasts who cultivate or are very intentional about cultivating community with their audience, with the people listening. And I think being a church podcast, we have not only a greater responsibility to cultivate that, but a greater desire. Like I think out of any podcast platform, a church podcast should be a beautiful bridge between people listening in the church and us speaking and building this community, cultivating community. Like Zach said, like being able to just create this dynamic between the listener and us.
Yeah.
Like we're real, like you can come up and say hi to us. Like we go to church together, you know, like this isn't like, we're not some corporate like podcasters. Like I don't even do this full time, you know, this is an hour of my week. Right. But we go to church together. And so we have a really beautiful opportunity, a really, really unique opportunity, I should say, to build community. So I'm excited for that to happen as we can continue with the podcast.
I love what you said. Like, it's kind of like we're doing this together. And I've learned so much about you guys being on this podcast, your stories, like what you love, what you don't, your journey with God. And I think a lot of podcasts, I love the podcasts that, like you said, are kind of, we're all in this together. We're learning together. Here's what I've learned. And I just want to like encourage you in this, but not necessarily saying like, oh, you know, you should do this because this is the right way. And I know what I'm talking about because that's just not true. So I like that aspect of being able to see you guys, see the people that we're talking to on a Sunday or on a Friday or worship night or youth group or whatever. I think that's really special, and that builds community in a different way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the coolest. Sorry, Zach, I'm totally.
You're good. This is
the last thing I'll say.
Conversation.
I think some of the coolest conversations I've had with people who listen to the podcast are when they like come up to me and be like, "Man, that episode on this, and then we start like talking about it.
Yeah.
Right then and there, like continuing the conversation that we started on the podcast, but is now being continued in real life, face to face. That's been one of the coolest. I think that's been more special to me than actually having the honor of like doing the podcast, like the conversations that come from it, and people, you know, be like, man, this point that Zach or Lauren or Josiah made or that you made, and this is how like I took it. I'm like, this is so sick.
Yeah.
I think that's a good reminder. Like the podcast is not the main thing.
In
what we're doing. You know, this is a springboard for deeper community and connection with real people, with you guys, with each other. And that actually connects to like why I am a part of this. You know, I was kind of I was invited in a little bit later than you guys, and you know, there's so many podcasts like there's just so many out there. So many people just get on microphones and speak. And part of my desire to be a part of this was not like, I was explaining this to people back home in California when they were like, oh, you're on a podcast now? That's like so crazy. And I had to clarify to them, but here's the thing. This is not just a bunch of people getting in a room saying, I've got something to say, so listen. If it was that, I wouldn't want to be a part of it because it's what everyone's doing, and it just becomes people ranting or you know whatever, and trying to build their platform, and
their name,
or their name, and that's not what I'm. I mean, there's probably a deep selfish thing inside me that's like, I want people to know who I am, but the reason
with that sweater, people will remember. You, so.
AKA Harry Potter.
Pay attention to me. So, but the only reason that I want to continue being a part of this, otherwise this would be an ego boost. The only reason I want to be a part of this is because we have a specific community that we are speaking into and hearing from. So when we say we want this podcast to contribute to cultivate, to be a part of community, we're saying that the podcast is not the main thing. It is a springboard for deeper community. And we're serious about that. Like when we say we want to hear your feedback and your ideas, like we're really serious. And like we have ideas of how can we do this. We've talked about doing maybe like live events, whether that's in person or just like live streaming, where we can directly interact with people. Q&As. We've talked about just all kinds of different things, but maybe building some kind of online community, like what is it? Discord. So we have all these ideas, and we want to genuinely hear what you would be interested in, even if it's not an idea that we've had. So how would you desire this podcast to be a part of community? How would you want to be part of this community? And we're just serious about that. The podcast is not the main thing. It's a springboard. And so please do genuinely let us know and interact with us. And like Abel was saying, when you see us, say hi. Like we want this to be a connecting point in person, not just online.
Yeah.
I love that. The springboard language, like totally, like this is like you can build a certain amount of community through the podcast and on the podcast and listener audience and us interaction and all that. But it really is supposed to be a springboard into deeper conversations. I tell my team this all the time with One Youth here at Midway that, you know, sermons as I preach, I don't want those to be the end all be all conversation. That should be a conversation starter that then gets developed in small groups and that then goes deeper in small groups. My hope would be like, as we do this, as we podcast, as we talk about certain topics, go through Bible stories, whatever the case may be, that it would springboard into further conversation, which then builds deeper community, builds more community around the church, being able to have conversations with different young adults, being able to have conversations with different people, intergenerational conversations with us. Like that's what it should be doing.
Yeah. And I think like the language for that is a springboard into further discipleship.
Yeah.
But in two ways, like when the, you know, you as a listener run into us, it's like, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your perspective. What did God teach you in this area and vice versa? And I think like, if we can create a space of community where what we talk about builds people up, and then also like that language, like springboard into, okay, let's talk about these harder topics and let's talk about what's happening in our culture and the things that may be uncomfortable to talk about or have very strong opinions and viewpoints. Like how do we bring the biblical perspective? Yeah. And that all kind of circles back to discipling people and our mindset as believers. So very, very exciting. Yeah. And the third thing that we really want to bring, and Abel, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, is authenticity. So what does that mean? And how can we sort of bring that to the table? Yeah.
So I think authenticity it's a buzzword right now.
True.
But it's very true though. I think more than ever, most of us crave authenticity and we crave people to be authentic and like we can sense when someone has a mask on and we can sense when someone's just pretending to be someone that they're not. And I think of the podcasts that I listen to and ones that I enjoy hearing and listening and getting content from, they're authentic people. Like I can sense that they aren't different when they're off camera or off the mic. Like that is who they are, right? And so my hope, my desire would be is that one, you guys would see that we don't get off camera and our personalities 180. Like we just continue these conversations just off camera. Sometimes we stop recording and the conversation still progresses, or we talk a little bit more about a different points in the conversation because we just wanted to, continue talking about it. Or we're talking about conversations like this on the podcast, but we're doing it off camera. Like I would hope that you guys would see that we are being our authentic selves, and that would encourage you to be your authentic self as well. So we want to have raw conversations, authentic conversations. We want to be able to, like you said, talk about the hard topics. One of the things that I love continuing to bring up is like current events and like how do we approach those from a biblical perspective, right? From a Christian worldview. How do we handle certain holidays? How do we handle, politics and the voting that's going to be coming up at the end of this year? I want to be able to create a space here where we can be our authentic selves, where we can wrestle through. Like we might come on a certain podcast day conversation and know where we stand at the beginning of it, and then by the end of it, maybe our minds are changed on this on this point. Or so we want you guys to see and you guys to experience the wrestle with us. I never want to come here to the podcast like Zach was saying and feel like I have all the wisdom in the world to offer and I'm just gonna spew a bunch of stuff. Like, no, I'm here to learn. I'm here to be taught. I'm here to be coached. I'm here to learn and grow and to have my mind stirred up and to fix my thoughts on what is right and good and holy and worth thinking about.
That's good. That's really good. Zach, why do you think authenticity is important to have in conversations that we're looking to have, like the harder conversations? Like, why do you think authenticity is important in the formula of that?
I think it's some of these conversations can quickly just turn into what is the answer I think I should give, or what is the
Like the
question
right
I think I
answer?
should ask.
Jesus.
Sunday
And
school answer.
Not and not necessarily the answer that I actually will feel like is true, or that I'm leaning towards, or that I'm wrestling with,
Yeah.
Authenticity in these conversations means coming to a real place where the questions are actually like rooted in reality and not in just this performative kind of culture that we have.
Yeah.
So I think it's just important because, there are questions that people are asking that are not being answered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how in many churches, people are answering questions that no one's asking. So we want to be answering questions that people are actually asking.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in my life is that sometimes the question is more important than the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that wrestling and that pursuit and that struggle and that doubt sometimes that leads us to a deeper place of resonance, of peace and things like that.
Yeah.
So the only way that we're going to experience growth, the only way that we're going to experience true connection, the only way that we're going to receive value in our lives from these things is by being authentically who we are. Because if we're not authentically who we are, then we're feeding into something else, this mask that we're wearing, this performance that we're giving.
Yeah.
And so these questions, we have real questions, we have real struggles, and we want to live in reality because that's where God is.
Yeah.
And that's where God guides us. So yeah, I mean, we could say so much more, but I think the thing is people have real questions, and there needs to be a safe place to answer them and see that other people are also wrestling with them, where some other people have also like gone through this before, things like that.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I think I think I can speak for all of us here that like we're not robots. We've got struggles and challenges and emotions.
We are not AI generated.
We are not AI generated. We actually have highs and lows, and we have breakthroughs, we have victories and defeats, wins and losses, challenges, obstacles. And so I would hate for there to be some sort of like pedestal, like, oh, they're on the podcast, they must have it all together, they must know the answers to everything they're talking about. That is not the case, but at least not for me. That's not the case. I don't think for any of us, not even when Josiah's here, like I think he would say that as well. We want it to be a place where like I love nuance. Like I love being able to like get into nuance. My girlfriend hates it. She's very black and white, right? She doesn't want nuance. She wants clarity. But I think with authenticity, sometimes there comes like you have to be able to step into some tension and some nuance sometimes to be able to get to a place of clarity. So my hope is that, as you're listening, you would sense our authenticity, and that you would sense that we're not just trying to give you an answer, but we're trying to wrestle through conversations and genuinely listen to one another if we have different opinions, and genuinely be open to having a conversation. I think even just modeling what it looks like to disagree, maybe on some items, and being able to have a respectful learning conversation could be awesome.
Yeah. So how can we invite our listeners into the same space? Either one of you. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but like practically, how can we encourage listeners and viewers to also operate in these three areas of like, how do they bring value to the people around them? How do they cultivate community and with us on the podcast and also in their communities? And then also how can we encourage them to like stay authentic?
Yeah.
Or be authentic, maybe for the first time.
Yeah. I think a couple of things that come to mind, continuing to learn and be a learner, reading, growing, listening to other podcasts, just like continue to learn, could help you add value to other people's lives, right? Because as you're added value, you can then give out value to give to others. Being in community, actually practicing community, get plugged into a life group if you haven't got plugged into a life group yet, or some sort of community, whether you're at a different church, get plugged into your local church community. The local church is a very unique place. There's not a lot of places that you can have intergenerational community where you could be in a life group or a small group with someone who is a parent or a grandparent. And so I would just encourage you to get plugged into some community, intentionally seek it out. And then just being okay with not knowing the answers to everything and wrestling through things, right? Continuing to learn, be okay with not having the right answer all the time or not knowing an answer, and wanting to find out what that is through conversations with other people.
Yeah. That's great. That's good. Good advice. Zach, any notes to add?
There's much more to say, but I think that was a pretty good summary as far as how they could be doing that with how the podcast can be a tool for that.
Yeah.
I wonder what that could look like. Genuinely. I wonder if that could look like, taking this podcast and using it as a springboard, not for just a conversation with us, but for conversation with people around you.
Right.
Hey, I just listened to this podcast and they brought this question up, this topic up. What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Hey, they said this. Do you agree with that? Yes or no? Why not?
Are they crazy?
Things like that. Should I unsubscribe? Please don't. Just kidding. But yeah, so definitely like all three of these values feed into each other. There's no true community without authenticity. And when you have authentic community, then it adds incalculable value to your life.
Yeah.
And so they all feed into each other. So just being intentional. We want to live life on purpose is a phrase I keep hearing come up. We don't want to live accidentally or passively. And thinking intentionally about these things is so important. And maybe some people put on a podcast just like to have noise in the background. Well, what could it look like for you to like genuinely meditate and reflect along with us on the things that we meditate and reflect on? Yeah. I'm wondering if we should talk about some of our ideas about different kinds of things that we could be doing with the podcast in this next season. Yeah.
Part of our Google survey asked the question, what specific topics or even series would you as a listener want to take part in and listen to? And one of the ones was like worship. Another one was a series on love, how to love the Lord, how to love others well, and how to love yourself well. We, want to talk about those dicey sort of topics that maybe we don't naturally talk about all the time. Like, I can't think of one right now. Purity culture. Yeah. Things like that maybe has some like different perspectives. And so, and another kind of segment that we want to start rolling out is hearing people's stories and doing interviews with young adults like yourself who have been walking with the Lord, who have gone through some crazy things, but what they decided to do after those crazy things, or even in the midst of those really hard times, and how that drew them closer to the Lord, or helped them have revelation about the Lord in a different way. I think I personally am very inspired by stories, and a lot of the people that responded to this survey also would love to hear stories and testimonies. So that's something that we want to kind of roll out to just help inspire you in your walk with the Lord. No one has all the answers when you're 18 to 30. Nowadays 35. There's so many questions about what I should do, who I should be, and so we just want to make sure that we're bringing content that would kind of address those things. And,
totally.
Am I missing?
We've also talked about, and I think this is going to be one of our episodes soon, is sitting down and working through a passage or a story from the Bible, a couple verses in real time with each other. So doing kind of like a Bible study through that. I'm really looking forward to that. I think we'll really grow. I'm really looking forward to studying the Bible with you guys. But I think that'll also help. Like, I would love to see comments saying, hey, you guys didn't mention this, but I noticed this in verse whatever, and things like that. Or even to, studying the Bible is really difficult. I'm not going to say that we're experts at it, but it helps sometimes to see other people do it, to be like, oh, so that's how it could look. Because when I sit down, I don't seem to be getting anything, So hopefully that could add value in like maybe modeling how a Bible study could look, not that it has to look. So
Yeah.
that's another idea we had that I'm personally really excited.
Yeah. There are a lot of people
About-
too on our Google survey that were excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just to reemphasize too, like we're looking for feedback. Like give us all the feedback, comments,
Yeah.
whatever you need to do to communicate to us something you'd like to see, a topic you'd like to be addressed. Like we're open. We're totally open to what how you want to participate in shaping the podcast and molding it.
Yeah.
And so we would love to see even more feedback because we know it's there. We know it's there, and we're welcoming it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
And,
can they give feedback?
so right now we're in the process of change. Okay. So the two things that we want to ask from you as the viewer and as a listener is, one, what sort of topics do you think would be helpful for your journey as a young adult or even beyond that? Or a youth, what would be helpful for you in this season of your life to hear about? And then two, oh, wow. Do you ever just have those moments where the cliff happens?
Yep.
It's like,
Oh, yeah.
It's like, where did that thought go?
Me yesterday. I think too, you were talking about
The name.
Yeah.
So we're in the process. Sip and Saints doesn't fully embody who we are and what we're trying to bring this year. And so if you have names that you feel would be a good fit for this podcast, please also share that. The way that you can do that right now is just by leaving a comment on this video. If you are listening on Apple Music or Spotify, you can just head over to our YouTube and also leave a comment until we kind of come up with a better system for feedback. So we would really appreciate it. As Abel said, we want you to help shape this podcast. We want you to help bring value. We want to hear from you and interact with you because it's important, and that's why we're here. So
totally.
This is an invitation. We are inviting
Yes.
you into this process of development that we are going through with this podcast. So this is an invitation to you to really take part and to join us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we really look forward to kicking off 2024 with a lot of purpose, a lot of value, building community and authenticity. Hope you have a great rest of your week.
New year, new us. New year, new you. Let's go.
What a
That's
great way
a
to
wrap.
end it.